Hello and welcome to Off Hold. I got a lot of shows on hold. It's like 50 shows now. That's a lot. And it keeps growing every season. There's that one show I don't get to after watching the first episode. So I just mark it on hold and never get back to it. I'm tired of that, so taking this opportunity, revisit some of the shows that I've had on hold for a while, and see if they're worth finishing. So, first up, I recently finished, just yesterday, Future Boy Conan. Now, Future Boy Conan is a 26 episode series from Miyazaki. It came out, it was pretty cool. It's pretty, in the older anime crowd, I would say, pretty well regarded. It's often brought up in a similar vein to a lot of the world masterpiece theater shows like Anne and Heidi. And I believe there was a pretty decent amount of staff overlap, even though Future Boy Conan wasn't actually a world masterpiece theater show itself. And initially, when I first watched it, I watched through about the first 10 episodes and I enjoyed it. I wasn't in love with it, but I thought it was a fun show and I was into it, but ended up on the wayside, and I only just came back to it now after posting a tweet. What should I finish? Someone recommended Future Boy Conan. I was like, that's as good a starting point as any. So here we are today. Now, ultimately, Future Boy Conan, I think, has a lot of positive qualities, but has a lot of negative ones too. I think the greatest strength of Future Boy Conan is its presentation. The show looks phenomenal. Even today, it looks way better than almost every show coming out now. The animation is delightful. It's expressive. It's fluid. It's dynamic. The shot framing is consistently interesting and engaging. The background art looks fantastic. The environmental, aesthetic design of the environments is really interesting and just conveys the sense of the series being one set following like a war, so it's sort of post-apocalyptic. There's lots of ruins and stuff. In one of the earlier episodes, one of the first 10 episodes, there's a scene where Conan is swimming through this underwater city after it's sort of sunken beneath the water, and it's like the ruins of the city, and it's fascinating visually. It's really interesting, and very much so something that just looks great. And also, like, the soundtrack, it's very much of its time, but it sounds great. It consistently has lots of fun themes that keep things going. Where my issue comes in is largely from the story perspective, because even though there are things I like, the general theming and the characters I find to be on the weaker side. So I guess first off, we have Conan, the main character, and he's kind of a hard character for me to get behind. The show introduces him following the death of his grandfather, I believe, and on this singular island called Remnant Island, because after this great war that caused a lot of destruction and millions of deaths and stuff, people have sort of been isolated into different pockets on islands, and he was on Remnant Island with his grandfather and some other fellow crewmates of his grandfather and stuff like that. The way the timeline works, I'm not totally sure of. It seems like basically all this post-apocalyptic stuff and then redevelopment happened in a really short span of time, an unrealistically short span of time. But I can let it slide. Maybe I'm just maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it isn't too short. But the thing with Conan is, okay, his grandfather dies. This girl comes to his island, and that sort of becomes his new mission: is saving this girl as she's being taken from her home as a sort of bargaining chip because this girl's grandfather knows the code to solar energy that the guy in charge of Industria, which is like this industrial city, really wants, but he won't give it to them because he thinks it's too much power, it'll be too dangerous, and so they're taking her. Initially, they don't have him, they capture him later on, but initially they're looking to find him because he's missing, and so they kidnap her as a, sort of to lead them to him because she's the only like connection that they know of. And Conan, immediately falls for this girl and sets out to help her by any means necessary, following his grandfather's death. And the thing is, that's kind of his whole character. He's just he's really hard to get behind because there's kind of a lack of faults in him. The only particular instance I can think of with regards to that is one moment where he gets too, like he wants to get back on people who are picking on the girl, and she is trying to resolve the situation peacefully, and he's not listening to her, and she slaps him. But then, like, 2 minutes later, that conflict is resolved, and she apologizes for slapping him, even though she was totally in the right, because he wasn't listening to her. And that, outside of that, it's mostly just like he runs headstrong into a situation that he shouldn't have, and still does perfectly fine anywhere. There's no consequences for his acting so brashly, because he's inhumanly strong. He can just he can bend metal, break walls, run up walls, dodge gunfire with ease. Like, it's very much cartoon logic, but even so, like, him more than anyone else he's absurdly powerful. Like, he can take down an entire army basically single-handedly. And the thing is, not only is he like super strong and super fast, but he's also incredibly smart, incredibly resourceful. So it's not just like he relies just on his strength, he's also intelligent and knows how to like strategize and stuff. And I'm just sitting here watching this kid be Superman and not have any qualities that I can relate to or really understand. And I'm left feeling kind of, what am I supposed to really feel for this character? I mean, I guess I'll say like some of his moments are cute. He is a fun character. Like, it's nice to see him interact with people because he's generally more lighthearted and has a good time with things. But there's nothing in particular about him that stands out to me enough to make that much of an impression as to who he is. In this entire 26 episode run, I still don't really feel like I got to know much of who Conan is, even though he is the central figure that we spend the most time with, more than anyone. Now the princess, what is her name? Lana, that's right. That's right. There we go. Okay, now the princess, whose name is Lana, she is also kind of... There's more to her, but I just feel like her character constantly gets relegated to position B. She's an extremely empathetic person, so she has that going for her. But also she spends pretty much the entire series just relying on Conan. There's a repeated thing where he's like, trust me, I'll save you, and she's like, okay, I trust you, and then he saves her. And this sort of three-step process just repeats again and again and again throughout the series. It's kind of like, trust me, okay, saved. Trust me, okay, saved. Like, so much of the series is just Lana being put in distress, him having to save her, him succeeding in saving her, which is part of where my issue arises with the story's structure. But like, as a character, she's nice. Like, she is seeing her interact with Conan is cute. They have like a nice little romance thing that's like, childish romance, so very adorable. Um, Her relationship with her grandfather is very nice. Also, like she's a very loving character, which I think does make me like her a lot more than Conan because there's like at least some sort of um, deep emotion being expressed. That like I get a sense a little bit for who she is and how she's been shaped by this tumultuous life she's been living. But again, not a whole lot to her. I don't know much outside of that. There's not really much I can say about her, or could think of to say about her outside of that. That much. Alongside this story, they're later joined by a boy from another island who is also quite strong, but more brash than Conan is, a little less intelligent. He's like a Conan B who has his own little subplot. Definitely not as important as either of them, and again, not a whole lot that I can say about him, or that I would have to say about him, but he exists. He's a fun character. He's more comical, definitely, than Kona, for the most part. And I guess one character trait he has is he is a little more selfish, but that's resolved pretty quickly. For the most part, I would say it's more his mindset is a little less mature. Conan behaves very maturely. He has a high level of not only like mental intelligence, of like tactical planning, and also emotional intelligence. He's really good at handling his relationships and, for instance, comforting Lana and knowing exactly what to say to encourage her and have her trust in him and not worry. And then that brings me to there's a couple other characters that I can cover, but the main one that I want to talk about before I go to the story itself is Dice. Alright. So Dice initially starts off as just a villain. He's brought into the story, and he's one of the people. He's the leader of the ship that is taking Lana to Industria that Conan is thwarting. But as the series goes on, Dice makes the transition to good guy. There's actually quite a few characters that start off as bad guys and at the end of the series are good. And Dice is the most interesting character above all else, in my opinion, because Dice doesn't act specifically for good or bad. Dice acts out of his own self-interest. He does, in whatever scene he's in, he almost always does what is best for him, what is best, what he thinks will most advance his personal interests. So if that aligns with the villains, then he's with the bad guys. If that aligns with the good guys, then he's with the good guys. And it's not always just like whatever's going to make him the most money or like benefit his crew the most, because he does have some sort of moral compass. Like when he does something bad, he usually is somewhat remorseful over it, or is like, oh, sorry, I'm gonna have to do this. And when it comes to Lana, the princess, he actually like he sort of swoons over her. He's like, oh my Lana, and that's ultimately what makes him transition from not necessarily bad guy to good guy, but bad guy to neutral figure, because he ends up being compelled by his care for Lana, ends up helping her escape when he sees like them abusing her. He helps her get out of Industria, and as a result becomes a fugitive in their eyes, so he can't side with them anymore. But there's other bad characters that he does make moderate alliances with throughout the series, and that's why I like him, because not only is he a hilarious character, he's consistently the most funny character. He's got a very humorous personality that's very over exaggerated, and oftentimes results in him being the butt of a joke. He overextends himself and is rejected, and reacts accordingly. It's just that fact that he doesn't act with like concern to specific stringent rules on right and wrong. that he acts out of self-interest, which is what most people act out of, which makes him by far the most interesting character and the most human character. Um, and he has, as a result of this, he can have like a real substantial arc that feels earned as he helps the good guys, but then the bad guys offered to help him save his ship, and he loves his ship, so then he turns on the bad guys, but then he ends up helping the good guys again. Like, their relationship is really interesting, and ultimately they sort of become him and the good guys become more close friends, and then he in the end of the series, funnily enough, he's fully settled into siding with the good guys, and following the end of this whole war and everything, he ends up marrying Monsley, who is also originally a bad guy that ends up turning to a good guy too. So interesting little tie up there. With that said, we do need to turn to the story. And this is like my core issue with Future Boy Conan, is the narrative itself feels like, funnily enough, when I return to it, shortly after the point in the story where I came back, which was episode 10, around episode 12 or 13, it felt like the story kind of resolved itself and then just started repeating, because they finally like get Lana back from Industria, and then they bring her all the way back to her home in High Harbor, and then the story keeps going. Like, it felt like a logical conclusion, but then it kept going. And it's not necessarily I have a huge issue with the fact that there's more story, but it felt like the world was so small that there wasn't enough material for this next arc. Like, it felt like we kept retreading ground because there wasn't enough area to cover. Because really, logistically, there's only like 3 real locations in the show. There's like, or 3 like central locations: Industria, High Harbor, and Conan's Island. We leave Conan's Island pretty early, and the series ends with them setting off to return to it. But like, we never actually fully like revisit that. It's like once we leave it, we're off it. We're gone. And then we spend most of our time in it going to and from Industria, and being in Industria, and being in High Harbor. And the thing is, like, once you get back to High Harbor, and you're spending all this time there, and then you go back to Industria, and then you come back, it's like, it just feels very much like the world doesn't have that much going on in it. It's like we only have 2 central locations and 2 central groups of people, that the world just feels really small, and it feels like we've already covered everything by around like the halfway point, 2/3 into the series. And this isn't helped by the fact that, like I said, Lana is just continuously used as the central point for the dramatic tension. Like, she's constantly the one who's being put in danger. She's always the one being kidnapped, and it's just kind of boring. It's like, I already saw this. I already know what's gonna happen. He's gonna say, "Don't worry." She's gonna trust him. He's gonna save her. We've been through this again and again and again and again. It's not that complicated, and it's also not that interesting. One of the worst parts of the series, because I feel like it has its ups and downs, right? I think the narrative is at its best when it's the characters just wandering around through an unfamiliar and interesting environment. I'm not a big fan of when they settle down in one place and it's just long character interactions, because I don't think the characters are interesting enough to warrant something that nature. Because usually it's something regarding to like the industry's effect on like the common people when it's arcs like that. But I don't think Industria either is all that interesting ideologically. I think they're the moral systems of this show between the good and bad side is pretty basic, and not like the grounds for any substantial social commentary. And so like when they're just wandering through these vast like areas. That's the most interesting, when they're being chased by the bad guys, and when they're running, and there's all sorts of really exciting and fun action sequences. That's like when it's most enjoyable, when it's very lighthearted and fun. But then when they get back to High Harbor, the story just comes sort of to a dead stop for a pretty uncomfortably long period of time, as they sort of acclimate to life in High Harbor, and the story just loses all momentum. Because what happens is they save Lana, they find the grandfather, but the grandfather decides he wants to stay because he wants to try and save Industria, because Industria's technological advancements are going to cause Industria to sink down into the earth. Like, they've destroyed so much of their I forget how they explained it, but basically they've ruined the earth, and they're gonna completely sink down. And he wants to try and save them because he's a compassionate man, and he doesn't want all these people to die for no reason. Even though the world leaders in industrial, or the main, really the one dude, the world leader guy for Industria, refuses to acknowledge this, and just wants more power. He's just a straight up bad dude. So they save Lana, grandfather's off doing his own thing, and it's kind of like our main characters have nothing to do. Now, for most stories, I feel like it would make most sense to change main characters. Like, instead of following Conan, how about we follow the grandfather? Like, it seems like he's going to be the one doing something interesting, and dramatic and central to the story moving forward. But instead, we just end up sitting around with these characters on High Harbor, and they sort of have to create a drama that doesn't feel earned. So the entire arc of High Harbor, before Industria arrives at High Harbor to try and take Lana back again, is that the island is sort of divided. So there's the High Harbor that Lana is familiar with and that she came from, and then there's the other side, which is led by this like teenager. He looks like a teenager basically, and that side of the island is mostly younger, like teenagers and stuff, who do a lot of like hunting and stuff on the other side of the island. And so the divide is that we have on one side a communist system, like where it's based on, just sharing, one's benefit with the whole society, and then on the other side it's supposedly a more capitalist system, though that is really not made clear, because we don't really see much of how the other side's system operates. They're pretty much relegated to this sort of like ominous figure where we will go over there occasionally, but we don't really get a sense for how their community functions. All we know is that, like, they make reference to the fact that he taxes people, so we know he taxes people. We know he's greedy, he's vain, and he's just all around a bad dude. But it's pretty clear that they're going for this sort of like commentary on these two different social structures. That comes across pretty blatantly. Like, right, they make the direct reference that he's like taxing the people, and he's greedy and bad. And then when Conan's asking, "Oh, how do you get all this stuff?" He's like, "Oh, well, I have all these fish, but I don't eat them all myself, right? I have clothes, but I don't make the clothes. We just all, we make what we need and we share among the people." And it just comes across as really basic, not interested in looking at both angles with any real depth. Like I said, the capitalist side is characterized as outright just bad. They are young, they are, brash, they are mean, They quick to resort to violence. Like any situation, they instantly are like pulling out their knives, ready to threaten people. Like it's not a balanced representation at all. And as a result, I just found myself totally tuning out because I was like, this is not any type of substantial social commentary. It just comes off as really um, lame moralizing. And we end up sitting in this situation for quite a long time before the story finally regains momentum. And when it finally does regain momentum, I think it does pick up. Like that point in the story is by far the least interesting and the most boring. The second arc, when they try and kidnap Lana, is still not totally interesting because we're still stuck on High Harbor. However, when they go back to Industria, the story finds more momentum. Though it's really weird because, like I said, it doesn't feel like there's too much propelling the actions of the characters, except for the fact that we need more story. Because they defeat the Industrians, right? And they, in fact, because they destroy the Industrian ship, they allow the Industrians to integrate into their community, and they're all happy to do so, except for one person, Monsley, who's been sort of like this like ominous figure throughout the whole series. She's always the one who's been like chasing Lana down and on their tail, and she's sort of like in a high position. They've defeated everyone. She's bitter about it, and they decide that they're going to go to Industria because they haven't heard from Lana's grandfather in a while, and they're worried. So they just decide to put the wheels back on the story, basically. And ultimately left me feeling like, what was the point of them coming back to High Harbor? Like, what did it do for the story? They could have just you could have just had them stay with the grandfather, help him out, figure stuff out. Maybe he gets kidnapped from them, and they have to get him back or whatever. But it didn't feel like there was all that much gained from them going back to High Harbor. Like, it didn't feel like it did much, except maybe humanize Monsley a little bit, because it does do that a bit. We see some flashbacks to Monsley's past. We see her starting to appreciate the naturalistic life of the people on High Harbor. So there's that angle, but it didn't feel like enough developed character-wise on High Harbor to justify all the time we spent there and how little actually happened. The best arc by far, I think, of this second half is really when we finally get back to Industria and we're trying to stop the dude who has sort of taken control of Industria. Originally it was run by a bunch of old dudes. He sort of is this brash young dude who wants power, and he sort of takes over, and there's this continual sort of back and forth with Conan and company battling against him, and like it ultimately, like the final arc, he manages to trick them into thinking he's dead. Then he steals the solar energy, which Lana's grandfather gives them so that they can fix a ship to get off the island because it's gonna sink soon, to save all the Industrians. And there's like this big fight with Conan and his friend and Dice. Jimsy is his friend's name. Jimsy and Dice, as they're like sort of taking down this gigantic ship, and there's really a sense of scale and danger. It's thrilling, the action's great as they're like running across and like destroying the ship piece by piece, and it ultimately goes down in flames. It's great. It's a great sequence of episodes. Like visually, like that's what it relies on. A lot of it is action based, which is what I think Future Boy Conan's strength is, which makes it a lot better. So I enjoyed that part more than the others. And throughout this, there's a little bit of a like romantic arc as Dice sort of falls for Monsley. It feels a little forced. It feels a little sudden. I mean, I guess it's not completely out of character for Dice to just like completely fall head over heels for someone, and just like be very forthright about that, because this sort of arc is like he says, "Oh, you're beautiful," and she says, "Baka, stupid, you dummy," and then he says it again, and she's like, "Dummy," and it happens a couple times throughout the series, and then like the ultimate resolution to that sort of little thread is like when they're getting married and he's like, "Oh, I'm the luckiest man in the world. You're so beautiful," and she smiles and says stupid. It's nice. Mosley's a fun-ish character, but again, I don't know how convinced I am of her bringing over to the good side. There's a lot of like bad characters that are just sort of turned good. For instance, the leader of the teenagers' side um, on High Harbor, like we literally, he gets defeated um, at a point in the series when Industria is coming back. Well, he tries to fight Industria, fails, then he joins Industria for a bit. That doesn't work out too well for him either. In the final arc, we just see him working together with High Harbor, and I guess he's like good now. Don't remember when that was explained. It felt kind of weird because he was characterized so much as like the scummiest dude possible. Like he betrays his own island to work together with Industria because he wants to be instated as ruler of it under Industria, right? He's just a total scumbag, as bad as it comes, and now he's just totally good. All right, okay, whatever you say, Miyazaki. Yeah, that's sort of like the general arc of things, and again, I think my core issue is that it just feels like there isn't enough material to merit being a 26 episode show. And there's a couple other small issues I have with it. For instance, how it handles its female characters, I think, is not the best. For instance, like the the only there's not very many female characters, like substantial female characters in this show. But really, there's like Lana, Monsley, and I forget her name, but it's Jimsy's love interest. The thing is, it's like the only female characters that have any real agency, any real power, and don't conform to typical gender like expectations are the bad characters. And by the end of the series, they conform and they were sort of brought over to the good side by um, uh, not necessarily exclusively by, but sort of like a signifier of their coming to the good side is falling in love with a character who is good. So in the girl back on High Harbor, the bad girl who's part of the club that's mostly boys, she ends up having feelings for Jimsy, and Monsley, ends up having feelings for Dice, and it's sort of like this aspect of like they sort of lose their personal agency and give it up to this like the wisdom of the male figure, which is a bit it's like because like throughout the whole show, like also Lana, she has no agency at all. She just totally relies on Conan through the whole series. She's like that's literally the consistent theme is Conan telling her it's okay to rely on him. So she acts very little on her like own will. She's mostly just relying on what Conan thinks is best. Like there's a moment where she wants to go with Conan, but he's saying no. But ultimately, he decides to let her come. But then there's another moment where she wants to go with Conan, but he decides that it's too dangerous, and so he leaves her against her will. So it's just totally up to what Conan thinks is best. There's just no real representation of a particularly strong, forthright female protagonist that doesn't have to have some sort of love interest to be important to the story and be a good character or a good person rather. So yeah, Future Boy Conan, it was an alright show. I know I ragged on it a lot. I don't think it was terrible. Like I said, the visuals, like the first arc is definitely the best, I think, because it's like everything's so fresh and new. It doesn't have time to get old. So if you give it a try, I would definitely recommend at least just watching that first arc because I think it's pretty solid, just an experience. And I enjoyed the show, like visually, I think is what makes it worth it. Like if you want to see some great animation, see like some beautiful background art and stuff like that, then this show definitely will supply that. So I don't think it's entirely a not worthwhile experience, which is why I'm giving Future Boy Conan a 6 out of 10. Thanks for watching this video. It's pretty long. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like or share it or whatever. If you want to see more videos like this, definitely let me know, and I'll make more of them. It's much easier than writing a whole script. I can just ramble and ramble, which is fun. Next up will probably be Kill La Kill, a show that I've also had it on hold for a bit, but we will see. See you in the next one.